It was a cold morning in New York City when the announcement came. Barron Trump, the youngest son of President Donald Trump, had been invited to speak at the prestigious NYU Stern School of Business. To many, it seemed like an odd decision. Barron had lived much of his life in the shadow of his father's public persona, a quiet figure often overshadowed by his father's larger-than-life presence. But that morning, the world would witness a side of Barron Trump no one had ever seen before. NYU Stern was buzzing with excitement. The rumors that Barron would give a speech had spread like wildfire, and the event had sold out within hours of the announcement. Students, professors, and even a few curious journalists had gathered in the grand auditorium, waiting for what promised to be a momentous occasion. The anticipation was palpable that as the clock ticked closer to the hour, the auditorium fell into a hushed silence. The lights dimmed, and the spotlight focused on the stage. Barron Trump, dressed in a sharp navy suit and tie, stepped out from behind the curtains. He was tall for his age, his posture confident yet reserved. For a moment, he simply stood there, surveying the crowd, before he walked to the center of the stage. The audience sat in rapt attention. Barron had always been a man of few words, and most people had no idea what to expect from him. Some speculated that he would give a standard speech about the Trump family or the legacy of his father. Others believed it would be a political statement, perhaps reflecting on the tumultuous years of his father's presidency. But no one knew what was about to unfold. Barron adjusted the microphone and cleared his throat. He looked out at the audience, his eyes scanning the room before he spoke in a calm, measured voice. "Thank you all for being here today. I know some of you might be wondering why I'm up here and what I have to say," he began. "I've never really been one for public speaking, and I've certainly never been one to seek the spotlight. But today, I want to share something that has been on my mind for a long time, something that I think the world needs to hear." The room was silent, all eyes fixed on the young man who had grown up in the public eye, yet remained largely a mystery to most. Barron paused, as if gathering his thoughts, before continuing. "My father, Donald Trump, has been many things to many people. To some, he's a hero. To others, he's a villain. But to me, he's always been my dad. And I want to talk about him, not as the president or the businessman, but as the father I know." The audience shifted in their seats. Barron had just broken the barrier of what everyone expected. This wasn't a political speech, nor was it a typical public address about his family's legacy. This was deeply personal, and it seemed like Barron was about to reveal something raw and vulnerable. He took a deep breath before continuing. "Growing up in the Trump family hasn't always been easy. People think they know my dad, but they don't. They see the image on television, the persona, the politician, but they don't see the man behind it. The father who would wake up early just to spend time with me before school. The one who would listen to my thoughts and dreams, even when I felt like I was too young to understand them myself." Barron's voice wavered slightly, a hint of emotion creeping through his usually composed demeanor. The audience was spellbound. Barron Trump, usually seen as a silent figure, was opening up in a way no one had expected. He continued, "My dad isn't perfect. No one is. But he's always been there for me, through thick and thin. And I know that's true for many of the people around him. He doesn't always get the credit he deserves, and I think that's something we need to recognize. The world only sees the headlines, the controversies, the politics. But they don't see the hours he spent working to provide for his family, the sacrifices he's made that most people will never understand." For the first time, Barron paused, his eyes drifting to the side for a brief moment. It was as if he was collecting his thoughts, preparing himself for the next part of his speech. "I've seen my father take blows, both personal and professional, that most people could never withstand. And through it all, he never backed down. Not for his own ego, but because he truly believes in making this country better. He believes in something greater than himself. And that's why he's always been my hero." A deep silence fell over the room. The students, many of whom had only known Barron as the quiet son of a polarizing figure, were now seeing him in a completely new light. Barron Trump wasn't just the youngest son of a powerful president. He was a young man with his own thoughts, feelings, and deep affection for his father. For a moment, Barron looked out at the crowd, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. The audience could sense that this was more than just a speech. It was a revelation. Barron was speaking from the heart, and it was clear that his emotions were just beneath the surface. The next words Barron spoke would shake the entire world. As the room remained silent, Barron Trump stood still, his gaze focused on the audience. The weight of his words hung in the air like a cloud, as if each sentence was a carefully crafted revelation meant to peel back layers of the family's public image. Barron took another breath, steadying himself. "I know many of you see my father as a politician," Barron continued, his voice soft yet piercing. "You see the debates, the speeches, the rallies. You see the Twitter posts, the sound bites, and the controversies. But you don't see the late nights he spends reading reports, making decisions that affect millions of lives. You don't see the frustration in his eyes when people twist his words or make him out to be something he's not." The room, filled with future business leaders and politicians, leaned in, captivated by the sincerity in Barron's words. The young man they thought they knew was no longer just a side character in the Trump family saga. He was a person with feelings, with deep emotions that had long been concealed. "I've watched my father get attacked from every angle," Barron went on, his voice growing more emotional with each word. "I've seen him mocked, criticized, and scrutinized every single day. And through it all, he's kept going. He's kept fighting, not for power, but because he believes in the country he's serving. He believes in the people of America, even when they turn their backs on him. He believes in me, and he believes in this family." There was a brief pause as Barron's words sank in. His eyes flickered with something more than just pride. It was a deep sense of love and loyalty, emotions that had clearly been building inside him for years. He took a moment to compose himself before he spoke again. "People often ask me what it's like to be the son of the president. And while I could talk about the perks, the traveling, the privileges, the opportunities, that's not what I think about when I think about my dad. I think about the lessons he's taught me. He's taught me that life isn't always fair, that success doesn't come easily, and that the only way to achieve something meaningful is through hard work. He's taught me to never back down from a challenge, even when the odds are against me." Barron looked around the room, his gaze meeting the eyes of the students in the front row. "I know my dad isn't everyone's cup of tea. He's made mistakes and he's had his flaws just like anyone. But what I admire about him most is his resilience. He doesn't care what people say. He doesn't care if they criticize him, attack him, or tear him down. He only cares about doing what's right, and he's willing to fight for it, no matter the cost." The room was so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. It was as if everyone in the auditorium was hanging on to Barron's every word. The young man, usually seen as a passive figure in the Trump family, had just shared something deeply personal, something raw, vulnerable, and real. The walls that had kept Barron's true feelings hidden for so long were coming down. Barron shifted his weight slightly, a gesture that made him seem just a little less poised, a little more human. For a brief moment, his eyes welled up with tears, but he blinked them away, unwilling to let the moment slip away. He cleared his throat again, a small smile tugging at his lips. "There's one thing about my dad that I think most people don't understand," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "He's not just a businessman. He's not just a president. He's a father. And to me, he's the best father anyone could ever ask for." A murmur rippled through the crowd, as if the entire auditorium had collectively held its breath. No one expected Barron Trump to speak with such candor, let alone express such deep affection for his father. It was a rare moment of vulnerability that stunned everyone present. "I've been asked, time and time again, what it's like to be raised in the Trump family," Barron said, his voice now quieter but stronger. "It's not always easy, but it's shaped me into the person I am today. My father has taught me how to be strong in the face of adversity, how to stand up for what I believe in, and most importantly, how to love unconditionally." Barron paused again, his hands gripping the sides of the podium. The crowd was completely still, watching the young man with newfound respect. They were witnessing something unprecedented. A son publicly speaking out in defense of his father, a father who had been the subject of countless criticisms, mockery, and scorn throughout his presidency. And yet, Barron was determined to share his truth, to offer a glimpse into the private side of the Trump family that had never been seen before. The audience was captivated by his raw emotion, and even the most cynical members of the press, who had initially dismissed Barron's appearance at NYU Stern as a publicity stunt, were now paying attention. Barron's eyes scanned the room, his expression serious but resolute. "I know that not everyone agrees with my father's policies. I know that some people think he's made mistakes. But I also know that he's doing everything in his power to make America better. I've seen the work he's done behind the scenes, and I've seen the sacrifices he's made for this country, for our family, and for future generations. And for that, I will always be proud of him." The silence in the room was deafening. It was as if Barron's words had reached deep into the hearts of everyone present, shaking them to their core. For many, this speech was more than just a defense of his father. It was a declaration of love, loyalty, and belief in something greater than political division. Barron took another deep breath, his gaze softening as he looked down at the podium for a moment. "I don't know what the future holds, but what I do know is that my father has always been there for me, and I will always be there for him. No matter what happens, he's my dad, and I'll stand by him, just as he's always stood by me." As Barron's final words echoed in the room, a profound stillness filled the auditorium. The world outside of NYU Stern had already begun to react, but for those present, it was as if time itself had slowed down. Barron Trump, a figure who had always lived in the background of his father's political life, had just given a speech that would change the way he was perceived forever. For a moment, the crowd was silent. Then, slowly, a single clap broke the quiet. It was hesitant at first, but within seconds, the entire room erupted into applause. The sound of clapping filled the air, a mixture of admiration and shock. No one could deny the raw emotion and sincerity in Barron's voice. He had not only defended his father, but he had also exposed a side of himself that had never before been seen by the public. As Barron stood there, letting the applause wash over him, his eyes scanned the room. There was a look of surprise on his face, a subtle acknowledgement that he hadn't expected such a reaction. But his demeanor never wavered. He remained composed, a young man who had just spoken his truth, even when it wasn't the popular thing to do. The media outside of the university quickly caught wind of Barron's emotional speech. The story spread like wildfire, with outlets from across the country covering the event. Headlines flashed across news websites. "Barron Trump's emotional speech shakes the world. Donald Trump's son speaks out in defense of his father. Barron Trump reveals the private side of his father." The speech had struck a nerve, particularly with those who had long viewed Barron as a silent figure in the Trump family. Now, he was being celebrated for his authenticity, his bravery in sharing such a personal story. Social media platforms exploded with reactions. Some praised Barron for his honesty and maturity, while others criticized him for defending a president they believed had failed the country. But regardless of the reactions, one thing was clear: Barron Trump had just made a significant mark on the national stage. At the same time, the speech caused a stir within the Trump family itself. Donald Trump, watching from the comfort of his private residence, was visibly moved by his son's words. He had never been one for public displays of emotion, but as he watched Barron speak, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Donald had always known Barron to be a private person, someone who preferred to keep his thoughts to himself. To see him so publicly defend him, especially in a setting as high-profile as NYU Stern, was a testament to the bond they shared. The president's heart swelled with a mixture of pride and gratitude. He knew that Barron had chosen to speak because he believed in him, and in that moment, he realized just how much his son understood him, not just as the President of the United States, but as a father. For Melania Trump, Barron's speech was equally emotional. She had watched her son grow from a quiet, reserved child into a young man with a voice of his own. She had always known Barron to be thoughtful and introspective, but she never imagined that he would speak so openly about his love for his father. As she watched the broadcast of the speech, a tear rolled down her cheek. Her son had just done something extraordinary, and she couldn't have been prouder. Meanwhile, on the other side of the political spectrum, the speech was met with mixed reactions. Some critics, who had long been at odds with the Trump family, dismissed Barron's words as mere loyalty to his father. They accused him of parroting the same rhetoric they had heard from Donald Trump for years. Others, however, saw it as a brave act of defiance, a young man standing up for his family in the face of public scrutiny. The speech quickly became a point of contention in the media. Political pundits debated its significance for days. Was Barron simply following in his father's footsteps, or was this a moment of true self-expression? Some saw it as a shift in the Trump family dynamic, a sign that Barron was ready to step into the public spotlight and take on a more active role in shaping the narrative surrounding his family. As the media continued to dissect Barron's speech, one thing became evident. Barron Trump was no longer just a passive figure in his father's shadow. He had spoken up and made a statement that resonated with millions of people across the world. Whether one agreed with his views or not, they couldn't ignore the fact that Barron had just carved out a place for himself in the political and cultural conversation. Within days, Barron was invited to appear on several major talk shows, where he was asked to discuss his speech and the impact it had on the public. In interviews, he remained composed but visibly humbled by the attention. He spoke about his desire to defend his father's legacy, but he also expressed a desire to pave his own path, to be seen as more than just the son of the president. But not everyone was ready to embrace Barron's new role in the public eye. Critics were quick to point out that his speech, while heartfelt, was still a form of political endorsement. They accused him of using the platform to further the Trump family's political agenda, to reframe the public narrative around his father's presidency in a more positive light. They questioned whether Barron's words were truly his own or if they were influenced by the political machine that surrounded his father. Yet, despite the controversy, there was something undeniably powerful about Barron's speech. In an era where public figures often hide behind carefully crafted personas and scripted speeches, Barron had offered a rare glimpse into his soul. His words were unfiltered, raw, and real. A reminder that even those born into privilege and power have their own struggles, their own emotions, and their own stories to tell. As Barron's speech continued to dominate headlines, the fallout from his public revelation began to take shape. The intensity of the media attention was overwhelming, but it wasn't just the press that took notice. Barron found himself thrust into a new reality, one that he had never fully anticipated. The eyes of the world were now on him, and the expectations that came with it were both exhilarating and burdensome. In the days following his speech, Barron was bombarded with interview requests, invitations to appear on talk shows, and offers from media outlets eager to hear more about his perspective on his father, his family, and the future of the United States. For a young man who had spent most of his life under the radar, this sudden shift was both thrilling and intimidating. He had never sought the spotlight, but it seemed that the spotlight had found him, and now he had to figure out how to navigate this new terrain. Behind the scenes, the Trump family had to manage the increased attention on Barron. Donald Trump, who had long been a lightning rod for both adoration and criticism, found himself grappling with the implications of his son's newfound prominence. On one hand, he was proud of Barron for speaking out, for defending their family with such grace and authenticity. On the other hand, he knew the scrutiny Barron would face would be intense. The world had not been kind to him or his family, and he feared that Barron would now bear the brunt of that animosity. Melania, too, was concerned for Barron. She had always been protective of him, shielding him from the harsh realities of public life as much as possible. She had never wanted him to be thrust into the political spotlight so early, but she knew that once Barron had taken the step to speak publicly, there was no going back. She was proud of him, of course, but she also feared the toll that the public's obsession with him could take on his mental and emotional well-being. Despite the concerns, Barron remained calm and composed. He had always been a thoughtful and introspective person, but now, he was being asked to reflect on his words and beliefs in a way he never had before. The weight of the world seemed to rest on his shoulders, but instead of retreating, Barron chose to face it head-on. In interviews, Barron continued to speak from the heart, articulating his thoughts with a maturity that surprised many. He spoke about the importance of family, about how his father had shaped his values, and how he had always felt supported by both his parents. He also discussed the challenges of growing up in the public eye, acknowledging that it had never been easy, but also sharing the lessons he had learned along the way. I think people forget that my family isn't just made up of public figures, Barron said in one interview. We're just like any other family, with our own strengths and weaknesses. We fight, we laugh, we love, and we try our best to be there for each other. My father, despite all the criticism and hate he gets, has always been there for me. And that's something that I'll always be grateful for. The more Barron spoke, the more people began to see him as a thoughtful young man with his own voice and perspective. While many had initially dismissed him as the quiet son of a controversial president, Barron had proven that he was capable of thinking for himself and articulating his beliefs with clarity and passion. He wasn't just an extension of his father, he was his own person, with his own views and aspirations. For some, Barron's transformation from a silent figure to a vocal defender of his father marked a turning point in how the public perceived him. No longer the shadowed teenager, Barron was becoming a person in his own right. And for the first time, many saw in him the potential for leadership. In the aftermath of his speech, Barron began to receive messages from people across the political spectrum. Some were supportive, praising him for his courage and honesty. Others, however, were less kind. Critics who had long opposed the Trump family used Barron's speech as yet another opportunity to attack the president. They accused him of indoctrination, of being manipulated by the Trump machine. But Barron didn't let the negativity get to him. He had learned from his father that criticism was inevitable, but how you responded to it was what mattered most. I don't care what people say about me or my family, Barron said during one of his interviews. I know the truth. I know what my father has done for this country, and I know the love and support he's given me. That's what matters. Barron's speech also marked the beginning of a shift in how he viewed his future. He had always been a private person, preferring to stay out of the limelight and focus on his studies and personal interests. But now, with the public attention that came with his speech, Barron began to consider how he could use his voice to make a positive impact. He had always been passionate about business and innovation, and he realized that he could combine those interests with his desire to help shape the future of his country. In the coming months, Barron began to make more public appearances. He attended charity events, spoke at business conferences, and engaged with young people through social media. While he was still relatively new to the public eye, Barron was learning how to navigate the world of politics and media with a sense of purpose and integrity. He had been given a platform, and now he was determined to use it for something greater than just promoting his family name. The world watched as Barron Trump evolved from a quiet teenager into a young man with a mission. It was clear that his speech had not just changed the narrative about his father, but it had also opened the door for Barron to step into his own future. And while the road ahead would no doubt be filled with challenges, Barron was ready to face them, just as his father had taught him. As the months passed, Barron Trump's journey in the public eye continued to evolve in ways that no one could have predicted. His emotional speech at NYU Stern had been the spark, but it was his ongoing commitment to speak with authenticity and purpose that ensured his place as a significant voice in both the Trump family legacy and the broader political landscape. The world had seen Barron's vulnerability, and in many ways that was the key to his impact. He had stepped out from the shadows of his famous family and proven that he had a voice, a vision, and the courage to share them with the world. At the same time, Barron's growing prominence was not without its challenges. The scrutiny from both the media and the public only intensified. The pressure of being thrust into the limelight at such a young age weighed heavily on him. He continued to receive praise from supporters, but also criticism from detractors who used his father's legacy to attack him. Yet, unlike many young public figures, Barron was learning how to handle the stress and use it to fuel his desire to do good. His voice began to resonate not only with older generations but with young people who saw in him a different kind of role model. He wasn't just a political figure or a symbol of wealth and power. He was a young man who had chosen to speak his truth, to defend his father, and to embrace the future with both confidence and humility. For many, Barron was a reminder that success didn't have to come with a perfect, untouchable image. It could come from the strength to rise above adversity, to face challenges head-on, and to stand up for one's beliefs. One of the most significant developments in Barron's life came when he made the decision to pursue his own independent endeavors outside of his father's political influence. While he had always been interested in business, Barron became increasingly fascinated by innovation and technology. He sought out mentors in Silicon Valley and New York City, eager to learn about the world of entrepreneurship and how emerging technologies could be harnessed to improve society. His commitment to building something meaningful for the future was evident when Barron launched a series of initiatives aimed at empowering young entrepreneurs. The projects he worked on were diverse, from environmental sustainability efforts to promoting educational access for underserved communities. His initiatives reflected his desire to make a positive impact, even as he navigated the complexities of his public life. Barron also became increasingly involved in advocacy, particularly in the areas of mental health and well-being. His own experiences, dealing with the pressures of public scrutiny and family expectations, led him to understand the importance of mental health in shaping one's overall success and happiness. He began speaking out about the importance of self-care, resilience, and seeking help when needed, particularly for young people growing up in the fast-paced digital age. By the time Barron turned 20, he was being recognized as more than just the son of a former president. He had become a leader in his own right, respected for his ideas, his integrity, and his ability to connect with people on a personal level. His ventures, from tech innovation to philanthropy, had gained attention not only for their potential impact but also for the way Barron had conducted himself, with humility, passion, and a focus on making the world a better place. His public appearances became less about his father's legacy and more about the future he was actively shaping for himself. Barron started speaking at industry conferences, addressing young entrepreneurs and college students who were eager to hear his perspective on leadership, innovation, and responsibility. It was clear that he had moved beyond the shadow of his father's presidency, carving out his own path forward. But the legacy of his father still loomed large, and Barron never forgot the lessons Donald had imparted to him. Through all the ups and downs, Barron had always admired his father's resilience, his ability to stay focused on his goals despite criticism and adversity. In many ways, Barron's own journey mirrored his father's, a young man facing intense public scrutiny, yet refusing to be defined by the opinions of others. As Barron reflected on his emotional speech at NYU Stern, he realized that it had been a turning point not only for the world but for himself as well. That moment had been the first time he had truly understood the power of his voice. It wasn't about defending his father for the sake of political loyalty. It was about standing up for his family, for the values they shared, and for the vision of America that he believed in. "I realized that my father's journey wasn't just his, it's ours," Barron had said in one of his interviews. "We may have grown up in the spotlight, but that doesn't mean we have to follow a script that others write for us. We can create our own stories, with our own voices, and that's what I intend to do." Over time, Barron's message resonated with more and more people. The young man who had once been seen as a quiet and distant figure had now become a symbol of resilience, independence, and personal growth. While his father's political legacy remained a defining aspect of his life, Barron's own journey had begun to shine through. He had shown the world that the Trump family was not just defined by one man's presidency but by a collective desire to create change, to build a future that reflected their values, and to empower others to do the same. And so, as Barron Trump stepped into adulthood, he did so with the knowledge that his voice mattered. He had become a beacon of strength for those who had once overlooked him, and in doing so, he had ensured that his legacy, the legacy of a young man who chose to speak his truth, would be remembered not just for who his father was, but for who he was becoming. In a world that often overlooked the power of authenticity, Barron Trump had shown that even in the face of scrutiny, vulnerability, and uncertainty, the courage to speak out and defend what you believe in could create ripples that would change the world.